As the night grew colder and the shadows stretched longer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. Have you ever had that sinking feeling, like someone was watching you, even though you were all alone? What would you do if you looked back and saw them standing there? Before we dive into the story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button for free to reach 100 subscribers and turn on all notifications to stay updated. If you enjoyed the stories, make sure to like the video. Let's get into the story. It was midnight. The campfire had long since died out, leaving only the flickering glow of embers. The wind howled through the trees, carrying whispers to my ears. Inside the tent, I listened to my friend's steady breathing, yet an unexplainable unease gnawed at me. I couldn't sleep. Even with my eyes closed, I had this eerie sensation that some unknown force was watching me. Before we dive deeper into the story, would you support me in reaching 100 subscribers? Like the video for the effort. Immerse yourself in the story. Suddenly, a twig snapped deep within the forest. What was that? At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks on me, but the sound turned into slow, deliberate footsteps. I swallowed hard. My heart pounded in my chest. I carefully unzipped the tent and peeked outside. The moonlight cast a pale glow over the ground. I saw nothing. Maybe it was just my imagination. Do you think these sounds were just in my head? Just as I was about to pull back, my eyes caught something in the trees beyond the campsite. A shadowy figure. It resembled a human, but it wasn't moving. I stared at it without blinking for a few seconds. Suddenly, it tilted its head to the side. A wave of terror tightened around my throat. My pupils dilated. I quickly retreated and zipped the tent shut. My hands trembled. I needed to wake my friends, but I couldn't make a sound. Then, breaking the silence, a whisper drifted in from just outside the tent. "Can you hear me?" A chill slithered down my spine. I held my breath. I didn't move. Several seconds passed. Then, something brushed against the fabric of the tent. A hand, running its fingers along the surface. I wanted to scream, but I was frozen in place. Deep, slow breathing circled the tent, so close that the walls trembled as if it were trying to seep inside. My fingertips were coated in cold sweat. It was terrifying. Just then, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the other side of the campsite, making us all jolt awake. My friends panicked. Grabbing a flashlight, I rushed outside. Jake's tent had been slashed open, and he was nowhere to be seen. The only thing left behind was a phone lying on the ground, its screen still glowing. With trembling hands, I picked it up. One single message was displayed. I looked back. At that moment, laughter erupted from deep within the woods. It sounded human, yet distorted, unnatural, with an echo that made my skin crawl. My friends huddled together, eyes wide with terror as we frantically scanned our surroundings. Jake was gone. That night, we stayed together, too scared to move until sunrise. But we never found him again. As we fled the campsite, I made the mistake of looking back one last time. Someone was there, watching us, tilting their head to the side, just like the figure I had seen the night before. After that, we never dared to go camping again. But the worst part was, even after Jake disappeared, I began receiving messages from an unknown number. The first one contained just a single phrase. "Can you hear me?" Then, strange things started happening to my phone. Whenever I answered a call, all I could hear was deep, ragged breathing. A note kept appearing in my messages, no matter how many times I deleted it. I looked back. At night, I began seeing shadows lurking in the corners of my room. At first, I blamed my exhaustion. But one night, when I woke up, there was something written on my mirror, as if traced into the fog. "Tilt your head." From that moment on, Whenever I was alone, I could feel something watching me from behind. But no matter what, I refused to turn around. One night, my phone rang. The number was unknown. My chest tightened with fear, but I answered anyway. A piercing, breathy whisper came through. "Jake is here." I stopped breathing. I couldn't speak. The phone slipped from my trembling fingers. My heart pounded like a drum. Just then, a shadow moved past my window. A dark, shapeless figure, humanoid, yet unnatural. It tilted its head. I was so scared I couldn't move. I squeezed my eyes shut. My heart was racing, threatening to burst from my chest. I stayed like that for what felt like hours. But when I finally opened my eyes, the room was empty. My phone lay motionless on the desk. I hesitated, then reached for it. The screen lit up with a single new message. "We'll meet again soon." A group of friends decided to make the most of their summer vacation by camping deep in a forest untouched by human hands. Olivia, Daniel, Max, and Emily were young adventurers who loved hiking and camping. However, they were unaware of the place's dark history. Camp 12. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and support me. This area wasn't even marked on old maps. Years ago, it was said to have been a summer camp, but over time, stories began to spread. Stories of people who ventured there and never returned. The townspeople would only say, "There's just an old camp there," and refuse to give any further details. At first, everything seemed normal. As they entered the forest, the chirping of birds, the sunlight filtering through the trees, and the damp scent of the earth made them feel at ease. Using an old map, they located what was once Camp 12. But the campsite was more dilapidated than they expected. Abandoned bungalows, rotting wooden tables, and remnants of tent sites lay in decay. However, the most unsettling sight was the rusted sign at the entrance. Camp 12, Survive. Emily laughed when she saw the strange message. "I guess they used to teach survival skills here," she joked. No one considered that it might have meant something else. As night fell, they lit a campfire and sat around it. Suddenly, Max claimed to have seen a faint light in the distance. No one paid much attention. Perhaps it was just his imagination. But a few minutes later, Emily saw it too. It was as if someone was walking through the forest with a flashlight. Daniel grabbed his flashlight and pointed it in the direction of the glow, but there was nothing there. The forest was completely silent. Too silent. At that moment, Olivia heard an eerie whisper. It was as if multiple voices were speaking at once, but she couldn't make out the words. She turned around and saw a tent zipper slowly opening. But there was no one inside. "Is someone messing with us?" Max said angrily. Daniel and Emily checked the tents, but found nothing. Strange events continued throughout the night. Quick footsteps rustling through the bushes, an eerie black mist lingering in the sky, and the most terrifying of all, wet footprints appearing in the campsite. But no one had stepped in water. As midnight passed, Olivia spotted the light again. But this time, it wasn't moving. It was directly in front of them, two small glowing spots flickering in the window of an old bungalow. Olivia shivered. "Are those eyes?" she whispered. Max and Daniel, convinced their eyes were playing tricks on them, decided to investigate. Emily and Olivia tried to stop them, but it was no use. As the two approached the bungalow, a shadowy figure appeared behind the door. Inside, they found an old, tattered journal. The last entries were written by a group who had camped there years ago. "When darkness falls, don't be alone. If it notices you, you won't return." Suddenly, the bungalow door slammed shut. Emily and Olivia screamed and ran to the door, but Max and Daniel were trapped inside. Footsteps echoed from within, footsteps that didn't belong to them. Daniel pounded on the door. "Open up. Something's in here," he shouted. But then, the voice they heard wasn't his. Because from the other side of the door, they heard their names, in Daniel's own voice. "Max. Daniel. Max. Daniel." Then, silence. When they managed to open the door, the bungalow was completely empty. Max and Daniel were gone. Only a single, aged piece of paper remained. "You cannot return from Camp 12. Olivia and Emily stood frozen. At that moment, they realized this place had never truly been abandoned. They ran back to the campsite, only to find that all their tents had been torn apart. At sunrise, they decided to head back to town. But no matter how far they walked, they always ended up back at the camp. And there, in the bungalow's window, the two glowing spots still flickered. Olivia and Emily's breathing quickened. The forest wouldn't let them leave. No matter which direction they ran, they always returned to the same place. Emily grabbed her hair in frustration. This is impossible. We're stuck here." Olivia looked at the glowing light in the bungalow window. It was moving now, first from left to right, then up and down, as if something was watching them, aware of their every move. Suddenly, a cracked whisper came from behind Emily. "Emily." Olivia grabbed her friend's shoulder and spun her around. No one was there. But the whisper returned, this time too close to Olivia's ear. "Olivia, I see you." Olivia gripped Emily's hand. "Run!" she screamed. They sprinted wildly through the trees, their breath ragged. But the most horrifying part was the hands emerging from the ground. Emily stopped suddenly and screamed. A pale, decayed hand had grabbed her ankle from beneath the soil. "Olivia, help me!" she cried. Olivia pulled with all her strength, but the hand wouldn't let go. Worse, more hands began appearing around them. These weren't normal hands. Their flesh was rotting, their nails broken from endless clawing. With a final desperate pull, Olivia yanked Emily free. But at that moment, something emerged from the trees. A tall, twisted shadow in the shape of a person. It had no eyes, yet it knew exactly where they were. Moving like a thick black mist, it whispered, "You will not return." Emily's voice trembled. "Is this the camp's curse?" Olivia squinted, listening to the whispers. Among them, she heard something familiar, Daniel's voice. "Olivia, Emily, help me." Daniel's voice suddenly turned into a scream. Emily tightened her grip on Olivia's hand. "We have to find him. He's still here." Olivia nodded. Running was pointless. They had to end this. As they stepped back toward the campsite, they saw that it no longer looked the same. Camp May 12th be over, but its secrets remain. Do you think Olivia really died? Or did something else happen? Stay tuned for more horror stories. The tents, the trees, and even the sky were shrouded in darkness. The wind had stopped. The sounds had vanished. Everything was trapped in eerie silence. But the strangest thing, Daniel's tent was open now, and someone was inside. Emily whispered to Olivia, "Is he in there?" Olivia hesitated but slowly stepped forward. The tent's zipper began to open. A hand reached out, and then Daniel's face appeared. But something was wrong. His eyes were completely black. Emily took a step back. "Daniel." Daniel didn't blink. "You came back." His voice was hollow, echoing, as if multiple people were speaking at once. Olivia gathered her courage. "Daniel, we have to leave. Can you hear us?" Daniel tilted his head. his black eyes locking onto Emily. Then he whispered, "It's too late." Suddenly, the remaining tents vanished. The forest was swallowing them. The ground split open, the trees bent forward, and the inky shadows surged toward Olivia and Emily. Emily screamed, "Olivia, we have to run." But Olivia realized something. This camp would never let them go. Running was useless. They had to end it. She remembered the old journal. According to it, the curse could only be broken if one of them stayed behind. Daniel was already lost. But maybe Emily could escape. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "No, Olivia. You can't." But Olivia had already made her choice. She raised her hand. "Take me." As the shadows engulfed Olivia, Emily ran. By morning, Camp 12 was gone. No Daniel. No Olivia. No trace of the camp. But Emily knew. They were still there. And Camp 12 was still waiting. A group of friends had decided to spend their summer vacation deep in the forest, camping. It was a trip everyone had been planning for a long time. Diana, Alex, Mia, Ethan, and I, Luke, decided to camp in an unknown forest far from the town. However, none of us knew that this area had a history as terrifying as its name before we arrived. The forest was wrapped in the cold winds of autumn. The leaves of the trees had turned yellow and fell to the ground with a silver glow. Even during the day, the forest was dense and chaotic, as if the sunlight could never reach its depths. There was an unsettling feeling from being so far away from settlements. Yet, still, this silence didn't disturb us too much. After setting up our camp in the heart of the forest, we ate dinner and sat around the fire. Everyone was taking turns telling stories, just like in traditional camping nights. But at that moment, I felt something was terribly wrong. There was an unexpected silence in the forest. Despite the crackling of the fire, the wind had almost completely stopped. Alex said, "This night is interesting, isn't it?" His eyes were staring into the darkness. "It's like we're not really here. Don't you think that's strange?" After he said this, we all fell into a deep silence. There was nothing around us, only a distant hum that pierced the night. At that moment, a faint rustling sound came from the depths of the forest. We all jumped in surprise. Diana perked up her ears and asked, "Do you hear that?" But no one answered. The rustling grew louder. It was as if something was watching us. A figure, moving quickly, was breaking through the thin tree branches. Our eyes strained to see anything in the darkness, but nothing was visible. Then, Mia softly said, "Someone's playing with us." But I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up and began to look around. At that moment, a silhouette appeared between the trees. It moved very slowly in the darkness. My eyes tried to make sense of what this shadow was, but it was just a figure, nothing more. My fear was growing. "Who's there?" I shouted. But my voice came back as nothing more than a muffled echo. Then we heard a scream. It sounded like someone from the town, but it was almost distorted and tense. Mia and Ethan immediately started running, but I couldn't move from where I stood. My skin was crawling, and I felt everything was terribly wrong. Diana said, "Come on. We have to get out of here." We all ran to our tents for shelter, but surviving the night and reaching the morning wouldn't be easy. Throughout the night, we all struggled to sleep in turns. The sounds from outside the forest became even more terrifying under the moonlight. Whispers grew louder with the stillness of the wind. When morning came, we went outside. However, everything around our campsite looked different from where we had experienced the night. The area around our tents was surrounded by a narrow dirt path. But this path seemed like it hadn't been used in a long time. There were even old stones that seemed to have been covered over time. No one had noticed this. At that moment, an old inscription at the beginning of the path caught my attention. Forgotten Road. What could this inscription mean? Then, I noticed a dark presence in the forest. But this wasn't just a figure, it was a shadow, constantly moving. Everyone started to move quickly, but the dark entity continued to watch us from the depths of the forest. Forgotten Road. Is there any explanation for this? I asked, but no one answered. Something was stirring in everyone's mind. After that moment, we decided to leave the path and head towards the town. However, as we got closer to the town, everything was silent. My eyes saw figures still looking out from the windows of abandoned houses. But there was one difference. None of the figures were real. This abandoned forest never let us go. A group of friends decided to camp deep in a remote forest, far from their town, on the first days of autumn. Diana, Alex, Mia, Ethan, and I, Luke, set off on this long-awaited adventure. Before entering the forest, we had heard that this place was an abandoned and forgotten campsite, but none of us fully understood the meaning of it. Before we entered the forest, would you support me in reaching 100 subscribers? Please like the video as well for the effort. As we progressed into the forest, the dense trees and tall grasses around us hid almost everything. Eventually, we arrived at our campsite, which seemed lost in time. The old tent marks, abandoned structures, and crumbling bridges showed that this place hadn't been used in a long time. The sound of the darkened water by the river created a growing sense of unease as the night deepened. The temperature was strangely fluctuating, sometimes suddenly cold, and sometimes hot enough to make us sweat. We lit our campfire and gathered around it to chat. The conversations were very natural and cheerful throughout the night, until, at one moment, the air around us suddenly changed. Everything became silent. Even the crackling of the fire grew faint. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper from deep within the forest. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then I realized the sound was becoming clearer. It was as if someone was repeating our names, but strangely, the voice came from something outside of us. No one paid attention to it, but I felt that something was wrong. "Luke, why are you so quiet?" Alex said, taking a sip of his drink. "Is everything okay?" I couldn't speak. I just raised my head and looked into the forest. At that moment, a faint silhouette appeared. It was moving slowly through the trees. Since it was a breezy night, the silhouette looked almost ghostly. My heart started racing. "Who's there?" I shouted, but my voice disappeared into the void. No one else seemed to notice. But I was certain something was wrong. Suddenly, we heard a scream. It sounded like someone from our town, but it was distorted, twisted, and terrifying. At that moment, no one knew what to do. Ethan immediately stood up and ran into the depths of the forest. But after a while, he returned and said, "I didn't find anyone," breathless. Something wasn't quite right, but there was an eerie feeling about it. "We need to leave," Mia said, her eyes gleaming with fear. We slowly retreated to our tents. However, spending the night there wasn't easy. Even inside the tents, there were whispers in the dark. Sometimes we heard the cracking of branches, sometimes footsteps, but oddly, there was nothing outside. The next morning, we woke up. We noticed that it had gotten a little colder, but there was still something strange in the forest. Outside our tent, early in the morning, we noticed a narrow dirt path no one had noticed before. It seemed like it had been there for ages. Strange symbols were carved on it, as if it was a path no one was supposed to see. We slowly made our way toward it, but something caught my attention. What could that be? At the end of the path, there was an abandoned structure. A house, but it was completely ruined. The walls of the house revealed chilling old writings. As we approached, I noticed light coming from the door. We slowly opened the door and stepped inside. The place was chaotic, everything was in disarray, but the most interesting thing was the diary we found on the floor. We opened the diary and began reading. It spoke of a group of people who had gone missing in the forest. It also mentioned that a dark entity was behind the disappearances. This entity could only be seen in the dark and when one was alone. At that moment, we realized that the only thing in the forest was the souls of the lost, trapped there. We all rushed out of the house, but I'm not sure how fast we were running. After a while, we reached the town, but the town was strangely abandoned. The windows of the houses were closed, and the streets were empty. As we examined the area, we realized that the town's inhabitants had also disappeared. We wanted to leave in fear, but that abandoned forest would not let us go. Night had slowly fallen, and in the depths of the forest, nothing was visible except for the faint light of the campfire. We, 5 friends, had decided to make this summer's camping trip unforgettable. Diana, Lucas, Eliza, James, and I, Sean, had been looking forward to this moment for weeks. But none of us could have predicted what we would encounter when we discovered the dark secrets of the camp. In the depths of the forest, we found an abandoned campsite, set up far from the town. The air here felt different. Everything was silent, but it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was the kind of silence that felt threatening. As the night progressed, I started to realize that something was wrong. What you're about to understand now. We were gathered around the fire, each sipping a warm drink, but the wind's howling was intensifying, and soft rustling sounds were rising among the trees. Diana's voice suddenly broke the silence. I think it's just the wind. Are you still that scared? The moment she said that, I heard a faint sound from behind me. It was so faint, almost inaudible, but with each passing second, it became more distinct. A twig snapped. We all fell silent, our gazes meeting. Eliza whispered, "Is someone there?" Lucas, trying to dismiss the tension, said, "Probably just an animal," but unease began to grow inside me. Then something moved in the forest. A shadow, darting quickly, but no one could quite make out what it was. At first, I thought it could be just a hallucination. But at that moment, something didn't feel right. The others noticed it too. As the night wore on, the strange noises from the forest intensified. Footsteps, crunching sounds, and eerie whispers echoed through the trees. "I think there's something here," I said, but no one took me seriously. Yet that night, I felt something was terribly wrong. Slowly, I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. But sleep never came. Suddenly, I heard another rustling outside the tent. But this wasn't the sound of an animal's footsteps. It was something much heavier. My heart started racing. I gently unzipped the tent and looked outside. The moonlight cast a faint glow on the ground, but it was too dark among the trees to see anything clearly. But there was something. A shadow moved between the trees. It looked like a human silhouette, but it wasn't moving. I stared at it without blinking for a few seconds. At that moment, the figure tilted its head to the side. Its eyes were gone, just empty black voids. A shockwave ran through my body. I quickly pulled back, zipped up the tent, and my hands were trembling. Then, a whisper came from outside. "Can you hear me?" A chill ran down my spine. I held my breath, briefly glancing around. A few seconds later, fingers began to touch the tent's fabric from outside. Slowly, a cold, almost frozen hand. The fingers were sliding across the fabric. When I saw this, I froze, unable to move, suppressing the scream rising in my throat. From outside, I could hear slow, deep breathing. It was so close that I could feel the warmth of it trembling through the fabric of the tent. My hands were sweating. I was consumed by both fear and a sense of mystery. I didn't wake anyone up. I couldn't tell them what was happening. I just waited. But before I could understand what was happening, a scream suddenly tore through the night, echoing. We all jumped up from our places, rushing outside in fear. James' tent had been ripped open, and he was gone. In the darkness, only a cell phone remained. The screen was still on. I quickly grabbed the phone, my trembling hands scanning the screen. There was a message. I looked behind me. My mouth went dry. Something was wrong. What was this message trying to convey, just a minute after what we had seen? As we frantically searched, those eerie laughs came from the depths of the forest. It sounded like a human laugh, but it was distorted, echoing in a creepy, twisted way. "Where's Jake?" I asked, but we all realized Jake was missing. No matter how much we searched, we couldn't find him, even after waiting until dawn. We decided to leave the campsite. But as we did, a silhouette appeared in the depths of the forest. In the dark, that figure tilted its head to the side, just like the one outside the tent that night. The next day, we left the campsite. However, there was something that didn't let us forget that night. When Melis's phone rang, the caller ID showed an unknown number. There was a silence, then a deep whisper began. "Jake is here." From then on, each of us had the same strange dreams throughout the night. When we woke up, everyone stayed silent for a while. Every time someone looked behind, we saw the same thing. A figure with no eyes, tilting its head, watching us. And from that day forward, Melis kept receiving messages on her phone that said, "Can you hear me?" We had no idea which number was sending them. At night, things would click, things would move. At every moment, we felt eyes watching us from behind. One morning, I saw this message on Melis's phone. "We'll meet again soon." And that night, we were not alone in the forest. James, Ethan, Clara, and Mia were 4 old friends who had a tradition of camping in a different forest every year. This year, they had chosen a more remote and unexplored place than usual: Blackwood Forest. There were strange stories about this forest, especially about an unmarked area on the maps, the Forbidden Zone. Before we continue with the campfire story, don't forget to subscribe and help me reach 100 subscribers. After setting up their campsite, the group gathered around the fire at night and found an old journal left behind by previous campers. The pages were nearly decayed, and the writing was faded, but a few sentences were still readable. "If you hear whispers after midnight, do not respond. If they call your name, do not look at them." Clara laughed and closed the journal. "You can't scare us with ghost stories. We came here to have fun, not to be frightened." But as the night deepened and silence fell over the forest, whispers began to emerge from the darkness. At first, they thought it was just the wind, but the voices became clearer. "Ethan, Mia, come here." Mia nervously looked at James. "Is that someone's voice? Or is it just an echo?" Ethan stood up, grinning. "Maybe there are other campers. Let's go check it out." James grabbed his arm. "Don't you think it's a little weird? There are no lights in that direction. If someone was there, wouldn't they have a fire burning?" Suddenly, the whispers stopped. A deep silence fell over the forest. Too deep. Even the wind had stopped blowing. At that moment, Mia saw a shadow between the trees. It was the silhouette of a person, but it wasn't moving. It was just standing there. Clara whispered in a shaky voice, "Maybe it's someone who got lost." But Mia instinctively knew this wasn't normal. "It's not moving at all. It doesn't even have eyes." James pulled a flashlight from his bag and shined it toward the figure. But when the light hit it, there was no one there. Then, Footsteps echoed from within their campsite. But none of them had moved. Ethan muttered, "That's impossible." They felt something pass between the tents. Yet, there was nothing visible. Suddenly, at the edge of the campsite, right in front of the Forbidden Zone sign, a female figure appeared. Her face was obscured, but her long black hair swayed in the wind. She didn't move, she just stood there. James's voice trembled. "We've come too close. We need to leave now." But the figure suddenly lifted her head. Her eyes were completely black. A scream echoed through the forest, and everything went dark. By morning, only Clara and Mia remained at the campsite. James and Ethan were gone. Their bags, shoes, even the water bottles they had drunk from at midnight were still there. But there was no trace of them. No one ever entered the Forbidden Zone again, because those who did never returned. However, the last words Clara and Mia heard that night still echoed in their minds. "You will return, all of you."